The docking clamp locked with a heavy clunk, and the airlock hissed open. That was the first sign that something unusual had come aboard Relay Post 7. Gron stepped through the airlock with the slow, deliberate movement of someone who had already decided he did not like where he was going. He was tall, nearly 2 meters, with a hard, dark exoskeleton that caught the station lights like polished stone. His forearms were folded across his chest in the Vrethian posture that meant, roughly, controlled tolerance. His compound eyes swept the docking bay in one flat, efficient scan. Commander Rail stepped forward and offered his hand. Gron looked at it for exactly 2 seconds before giving it one short, firm shake. He had clearly studied the gesture. He had not warmed to it. "Welcome to Relay Post 7, Rail said. "We are glad to have you." "I am here to observe," Gron said. His translator rendered his voice as flat and dry as paper. "Not to be welcomed." Rail smiled anyway. He had dealt with difficult diplomats before, though none quite like this one. Gron was the first Vrethian ever assigned to live on a human station. The Vrethian Compact had been blocking humanity's membership in the Galactic Compact for 11 years, calling humans too unstable, too irrational, too messy in their thinking and their habits. This assignment was supposed to change that. Gron was meant to observe, report, and give the Council an honest account of human culture. Rail privately suspected the Council already had their conclusion written and just needed Gron's signature on it. The tour of the station went smoothly until they reached Corridor 4. Gron stopped walking. His head turned slowly toward the galley door at the end of the corridor, and something in his body went very still, the way a person goes still when they hear a sound they cannot identify and do not trust. The smell was coming from inside, garlic hitting hot oil, bread that had been baking for an hour, something sweet underneath and something deep and savory underneath that. Dira was cooking the afternoon meal, which she did every day, loudly and without apology. "What," Gron said slowly, "is that?" "That's the galley," Rail said. "Our cook is preparing the midday meal." Gron's mandibles moved in a way the translator did not catch. He took one step back. "It is a chemical release, uncontrolled. It is entering my sensory receptors without my consent." "We call it smell," Rail said. "It's considered a good sign usually. Means the food is ready." Gron turned to look at him with all the warmth of a stone wall. "I will require my quarters to be as far from this location as structurally possible, and I will formally request that this process be contained." Rail nodded slowly. "I will see what I can do." What he could do, practically, was nothing. The galley was in the center of the station. The smell went where it wanted. He moved Gron's quarters to the far end of the east wing and then walked to the galley, where Dira was standing at the stove with a long spoon and an expression that said she had already heard everything through the ventilation system. "He wants me to stop cooking," she said. "He wants you to contain it," Rail said, "which is not the same thing." "It absolutely is the same thing." Rail pulled out a chair and sat down at the prep table. He was quiet for a moment, watching her stir. The stew in the pot was already thick and dark, and the smell of it was, objectively, extraordinary. He had eaten Dira's cooking for 3 years, and it still did that thing to him, where his body remembered it was hungry before his mind got around to it. "I need you to help me with something," he said. She looked at him sideways. "No. You haven't heard it yet. You want me to use food to break down the alien diplomat who just told me to stop cooking on my own station." She pointed the spoon at him. "That is what you are about to say." Rail said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Dira turned back to the pot. She stirred it twice. She was quiet long enough that the sound of the stew simmering was the loudest thing in the room. "The diplomatic talks have been dead for 4 months, Rail said quietly. "Every formal session goes nowhere. He walks in with his conclusions already made. But he came here, Dira. He is physically here. That means something in his system still has an open question." She did not say anything for a while. "I'm not making anything special for him," she finally said. "I cook what I cook. If he wants to be difficult about it, that's his business." Rail stood up. "That's all I'm asking." He left her to it. He did not tell her that in 11 years of talks, no human diplomat, no formal proposal, and no galactic treaty had moved the Vrethian position even slightly. He did not tell her that the entire future of humanity's place in the galaxy might genuinely depend on whether a rigid alien with 4 arms could be made to sit still long enough to smell something good. He figured she probably already knew. That night, Gron sat in his quarters and recorded his first report to the Vrethian High Council. His voice was precise and unhurried. Day 1. The station is functional but poorly organized by Vrethian standards. The crew is informal to a degree that suggests systemic inefficiency. Their food preparation process is invasive and appears to serve no rational purpose beyond basic caloric intake. I see no common ground from which meaningful assessment can begin. I will continue to observe. He stopped the recording. He sat in the silence of his quarters for a long time. Down the corridor, through 4 sealed doors and a ventilation filter that was doing its absolute best, he could still, faintly, smell the stew. He did not record that part. 3 days into Gron's stay on Relay Post 7, Dira made the stew again. She had not planned it as a provocation. She made the stew because it was cold in that particular way that stations got when the heating system cycled down at night, and because she had the ingredients, and because it was the kind of food that made the whole station feel less like a metal box floating in nothing. She put the pot on at mid-morning, turned the heat low, and let it go. By noon, the smell had reached Corridor 4. By noon, it had reached the east wing. The intercom in the galley crackled. "This is Gron. I am formally nodding that the chemical dispersal from your food preparation has reached my quarters again despite the ventilation adjustment." Dira wiped her hands on her apron. "Noted," she said into the intercom. Silence. "Then it is stronger than the previous occurrence." "It's been going longer," she said. "Slow stew takes about 4 hours." Another silence, longer this time. 4 hours, Gron said, to prepare a single meal. For 12 people, yes. She heard something on his end that might have been the Vrethian equivalent of a deeply tired exhale. Then the intercom clicked off. He came to the galley 30 minutes later. He stood in the doorway and did not come in, which was fine with Dira, because she had not invited him in. He stood there with his arms folded, and his compound eyes moving slowly around the room, taking in the pots, the counter lined with chopped vegetables, the old wooden spoon she had brought from home that had no business being on a space station but was there anyway. "You use heat," he said. "We do." "Why?" "The proteins break down adequately at lower temperatures over longer periods. Heat is inefficient in terms of energy expenditure." "Heat is fast," she said, "and it does things to the food that slow and cold don't do. Changes the structure, changes the flavor." He stepped into the galley then slowly, like someone entering a room they are not sure is safe. He stopped near the counter, a good meter away from the stove, and looked at the pot. "Flavor," he said. "You change the chemical composition deliberately, for sensory effect." "That's one way to put it." "What is another way?" Dira thought about it. She picked up the spoon and stirred the stew once, slow and deep, bringing up the thicker parts from the bottom. The smell shifted, deepened, got richer. Gron's mandibles moved. He did not step back. That was the thing she noticed. "My grandmother used to say you cook with memory," she said. "Every time you make something you learned from someone, they are in the kitchen with you. The recipe carries them forward." Gron was quiet. "That is not a rational framework." "No," she agreed, "it's a human one." She pulled a small bowl from the shelf, ladled a portion of the stew into it, and set it on the counter in front of him. She did not push it toward him. She did not say anything. She just put it there and went back to stirring the pot. He looked at the bowl for a long time. It was dark brown and thick, with pieces of root vegetable and soft protein sitting just above the surface of the broth. Steam came off it in a thin, slow curl. The smell up close was completely different from the smell in the corridor. In the corridor, it had been a general warmth, like a signal. Up close, it was specific. It had layers. There was something sharp at the top, something round and deep underneath, and something else entirely at the back of it that he did not have a category for. "You combined 12 separate ingredients," he said. 14, she said. "Salt and pepper don't get counted usually, but they should. To produce one unified result. To produce something that's more than the parts," she said. "The garlic is not great on its own. The base broth is fine but plain. The herbs alone are just herbs. But together, after 4 hours of low heat, you get something that none of them could be individually." Gran looked at the bowl. He looked at it the way someone looks at a proof they do not yet understand but can see the shape of. He did not eat it. He stood there another minute and then he straightened, folded his arms and said, "I see. Thank you for the explanation." He turned toward the door. He stopped in the doorway. He stood there for a moment with his back to her, and she could not see his face, only the rigid line of his exoskeleton and the slight turn of his head, like he was listening for something. Then he walked out. Dira looked at the untouched bowl on the counter. She picked up the spoon. She tasted the stew herself, thought about it, added a pinch of salt and went back to work. She did not throw the bowl out. She covered it with a cloth and left it on the counter. She was not entirely sure why. The station ran on a 24-hour cycle. At the 15th hour, the main corridor lights dimmed to half and the galley went quiet. Most of the crew was asleep or close to it. The kitchen sat empty, the pots cleaned, the counters wiped down, the stove cold. The covered bowl was still on the far counter, where Dira had left it. Gran had not slept. Vrethians required less sleep than humans, and on this particular night he had not managed even that. He lay in his bunk in the East Wing quarters with his 4 arms at his sides and his eyes open in the dark, running calculations in his head. He was trying to write his next report to the council in his mind, ordering his observations, preparing his language. The problem was the smell. Not the smell itself. The smell was gone now, filtered out by the ventilation hours ago. The problem was that he could still reconstruct it. His sensory memory was precise and highly functional. He could recall any sensory input with accuracy. But the data of the stew's smell would not sit still the way other sensory data did. It kept shifting. He would recall it, and it would remind him of the warmth that had come through the galley door, and that would remind him of the steam off the bowl, and that would remind him of what Dira had said. Every time you make something you learned from someone, they are in the kitchen with you. He got up at the 16th hour. He told himself he was going to check on the atmospheric readings in the central corridor. This was not true, but it was a useful thing to tell himself, so he told it. The galley was dark except for the low amber standby lights along the floor. Gran stood in the doorway for a moment. The room smelled faintly of cleaning solution and something older underneath it, something warm that the cleaning solution had not fully erased. He walked to the counter. The bowl was there under the cloth. He stood in front of it. He had eaten nothing since his morning nutrition cube. That was not unusual. Vrethians could go 30 hours without intake without any decline in function. He was not hungry. He did not experience hunger the way humans described it. He experienced a data signal that indicated caloric replenishment was advisable, and that signal was currently at a low level. He lifted the cloth. The stew had cooled and thickened. The surface had gone flat and still. It did not look impressive. There was a spoon on the counter. Dira had left it beside the bowl. He did not know if she had done this deliberately. He looked at the spoon for a moment. Vrethians did not use utensils. Their nutrition cubes were simply placed on the tongue. The concept of a spoon was understood by him academically, the same way he understood many human tools. He picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. He dipped the spoon into the stew and brought it up slowly. He held it in front of him. Steam had long since stopped rising. The stew sat in the bowl of the spoon, dark and thick and very still. He put it in his mouth. For approximately 3 seconds, nothing happened. He processed the temperature first, which was cool and slightly above room ambient. Then the texture reached him, and it was unlike anything in his experience. Smooth in some places, slightly resistant in others, with soft, solid pieces that gave way under minimal pressure. Then the flavor hit. Gran had read about human flavor. He had studied the biochemical literature. He understood that taste receptors responded to dissolved chemical compounds and sent signals to the brain, and that humans found these signals pleasurable as an evolved trait tied to caloric and nutritional identification. He had understood this completely. He had understood nothing. The salt reached him first, clean and immediate. Then behind it, something deep and round that seemed to come from everywhere at once, not just his mouth but somewhere in his chest, like a low sound that was felt more than heard. Then the herbs, sharp and bright, cutting across the top of everything else. And underneath all of it, something long and slow and almost dark, the flavor of 4 hours and heat and time. He stood completely still. His compound eyes, which normally moved in small, constant adjustments, stopped moving entirely. His mandibles were very still. His 4 arms, usually folded or in deliberate positions, hung at his sides. He put the spoon back in the bowl. He stood there for a long time. Then he picked the spoon up again and took another taste. He did not hear Dira come in. She had woken for water and seen the galley light on through the corridor window, and she came to the door and stood there in the dim amber light, not saying anything, watching him standing alone in the dark kitchen with a spoon in one hand and the covered cloth in the other, and she understood immediately what she was looking at. She walked to the counter. She sat down on the stool across from the bowl. She did not say a word. She reached out and slid the bowl 2 inches closer to him. He looked at her, she looked at him. She shrugged one shoulder. Gran ate the rest of the stew. When the bowl was empty, he set the spoon down carefully and was quiet for a long moment. The station hummed around them, low and constant. "I do not understand what just happened," he said. Dira rested her chin on her hand. "Yeah," she said, "that's kind of the point." Nobody said anything about that night. Not Dira, not Gran, not the ventilation system that had quietly recorded a life sign in the galley at the 16th hour. Dira wiped the bowl and put it away. Gran returned to his quarters and lay in the dark until the morning cycle started. Neither of them mentioned it the next day. But 2 days later, Gran came to the galley at the regular meal hour. He did not say he was coming. He simply appeared in the doorway while the crew was already seated and eating, walked to the far end of the table, and sat down. He brought his morning nutrition cube with him and placed it on the table in front of him, which made it very clear he had not come to eat. Dira brought a plate to the table for herself and sat 3 seats away, and did not make any kind of event out of his presence. The rest of the crew followed her lead, mostly. There was some eye contact between crew members that communicated a great deal without words. Gran sat there for the full meal period and then left. He came back the next day, and the day after that. By the 4th day, the nutrition cube stopped appearing on the table with him. On the 6th day, Dira was making flatbread. It was a simple thing, just flour and water and a little salt, pressed flat and cooked on a dry pan. She was doing it at the prep counter when Gran arrived early and found her there alone. He watched for a while from across the room. "You are shaping it by hand," he said. "Machine press makes it too uniform," she said. "The uneven parts cook faster and get a little crisp at the edges. That's the best part." He came closer. He watched her press the dough with her palms, turning it, stretching it out. "May I attempt it?" he said. She looked at him. He was not joking. His compound eyes were completely focused on the dough. She tore off a piece and put it in front of him. He had 4 arms, which turned out to be an advantage. He pressed with 2 and shaped with the other 2, and his exoskeleton gave him precise, even pressure that was actually quite consistent. On his first attempt, the bread came out nearly perfect, which she found slightly annoying. "You learn fast," she said. "I observe accurately," he said. He was looking at the flat piece of dough he had made. He turned it over once. "My species once had foods like this." She put her bread on the pan. "I know, you told me you found it in old archives." "I did not tell you that." "You talked in your sleep," she said, and watched his mandibles snap before she grinned. "I'm joking. You mentioned it last week when we were talking about salt." He was quiet. He put his flatbread on the pan beside hers. They watched the 2 pieces cook together on the dry heat, edges curling just slightly, small brown spots forming across the surface. "The efficiency campaigns removed flavor from our food chain over the course of 3 generations," Gran said. "I found record of public debate at the time. There was significant resistance." "People don't give up food easily," Dira said. They did not. The campaign framed flavor as distraction from productivity, as a source of division since different regions had different foods, and this created preference and identity conflict. He was quiet for a moment. It was considered a solution to a social problem. Dira flipped both pieces of bread with her hand. "Did it work?" "We have had no food-related social conflict in 240 years, Gran said. "And what have you had instead?" Gran did not answer immediately. He watched the bread. "Efficiency," he said at last. "It came out a little flat." She took the bread off the pan, tore both pieces in half, and put one half in front of him. She ate hers without offering anything further. He picked up his half. He looked at it for a moment, then he ate it. He chewed slowly. The bread was plain, just flour and water and salt and a little heat. It was not the stew. It was much simpler than the stew. But there was something in the crisp edge, in the slight unevenness of it, that his nutrition cube had never offered, which was the sense that something had been made. He ate the other half. Down the corridor in the small meeting room he used for diplomatic communications, a request had come in from Commander Rail's office. The formal talks, stalled since before Gran arrived, had been quietly rescheduled. The human side had proposed a new framework. Nothing was guaranteed, but the door was open again, and nobody was quite sure why. Rail had a theory. He did not share it with anyone. In the galley, Dira started making another batch of dough. Gran folded 2 of his arms and watched her work. After a moment, without being asked, he reached out and began to shape a second piece beside her. His technique had already improved from the first attempt. She noticed. She did not say anything about it. But she let him shape 3 more, and she cooked all of them. And they stood together at the counter and ate warm flatbread in a space that had started to smell, quietly and permanently, less like a station and more like a kitchen. The call from the Vrethian High Council came in the early morning cycle. Gran had been expecting it for weeks. He sat in front of the communication relay in his quarters, exoskeleton straight, arms folded in formal posture, and looked at the 9 faces of the council arranged across the transmission screen. They were expressionless, as Vrethian officials always were, but he had known these faces for most of his career, and he could read the particular quality of their stillness. They were waiting for confirmation. "Your assessment period concludes in 6 days, said Council Chair Veth, the eldest and most senior member. "We expect your formal report on the human station and its inhabitants. You understand the weight of this submission." "I do," Gran said. "Previous assessments from 17 other species have classified humans as structurally unsuitable for Galactic Compact membership, emotionally unstable, inefficient in governance, chaotic in their social architecture." Veth paused. "We expect you have found similar data." Gran was quiet for a moment. The relay hummed softly. "I have found data," he said. He had been writing the report in his head for 3 weeks. He had known, even while writing it, that it would not say what the council expected. He had rewritten it 4 times, trying to find a version they might accept. Each time it came out the same. He had stopped rewriting. "I will submit my full report in 2 days," he said, "as required." The council accepted this and closed the channel. He sat alone in his quarters for a long time after. Then he began to record. The report he sent to the council 2 days later was 30 minutes long, which was unusual. Standard cultural assessments ran 8 to 10 minutes. He had never submitted one over 15. The council listened to the full 30 minutes without interruption, which was itself unusual. He told them about the stew first, not as a personal account but as a data point. He described the ingredient combination in precise chemical terms, the reaction of heat on each compound, the resulting flavor profiles, and the estimated time investment involved per meal. He was methodical and specific. Then he told them what it meant. He explained that human food was not simply nutrition. It was a recording system. A grandmother in a small house somewhere on Earth made a recipe and taught it to her granddaughter, and 40 years later that recipe was made on a space station at the edge of neutral territory, and it carried the grandmother's particular knowledge of salt ratios and cooking times and which herbs grew best in her region. The grandmother was dead. The recipe was not. He told them about flatbread, about the deliberate imperfection of hand shaping, about how humans chose the less efficient method because the result carried something that the efficient method removed. He told them about the word comfort food and what it meant, and what it implied about the relationship between a species and its history, its grief, its celebrations, its daily life. He told them that he had reviewed the Vrethian efficiency campaigns of 240 years ago and had found the public debate records, and that the Vrethian people had, over 3 generations, been asked to give up something that humans had understood well enough to never let go of. He said this carefully, without accusation, as a data point. He said that humanity's chaos was not a design flaw. It was a design. Their inconsistency was not weakness. It was range. They were capable of encoding an entire civilization into a single recipe and passing it forward through time without ever needing a data system to hold it, because the humans themselves were the data system. He said that in his assessment, a species capable of that was not unstable. It was, by any meaningful definition, formidably stable, in ways the Galactic Compact had not previously encountered and did not have a category for. He said the block on human membership should be removed. The council was silent when the recording ended. 3 members spoke in quick succession, raising objections, citing precedent, questioning the validity of culinary analysis as a metric for political assessment. Gran listened to all of it without responding. Then Veth, who had said nothing since the recording ended, spoke. "Gran," she said, "did you eat with them?" The other council members went quiet. Gran looked at Veth. Her face was perfectly still, but her eyes, compound and gold like his own, were doing something he had not seen in them before, something that looked very much like the thing he had felt, standing alone in a dark kitchen with a spoon in his hand and no explanation for what was happening to him. "Yes," he said. Veth looked at him for a long moment. Then she voted in favor. The final count was 5-4. The Vrethian block on human membership in the Galactic Compact was lifted that same day. Gran received the confirmation notice an hour later. He read it once, set it aside, and went to the galley where Dira was making the afternoon meal. He stood in the doorway. She looked up. He did not tell her what had happened. He just stood there, and she seemed to read something in his posture because she nodded once slowly and turned back to the stove. He sat down at the table, not at the far end this time, near the middle. "It'll be ready in 20 minutes, she said. "I will wait," he said. On the last day, the galley was full. Rail had told the crew at morning assembly that Gron's assignment was ending and that Dira was cooking a farewell meal. He had said it as a simple announcement. Half the crew had shown up an hour early to help set the table, which nobody asked them to do, and which said everything about what the last 3 months had become on Relay Post 7. Dira cooked for 4 hours. She made the stew, the flatbread, the spiced rice her grandmother had taught her, a slow-braised dish that took 3 pots to make, and a simple fried bread at the end because she had batter left over, and it seemed wrong to waste it. The galley was loud and warm and full of steam, and the kind of noise that happens when people who have eaten together many times are all in the same room at once. Gron arrived exactly on time. He stood in the doorway for a moment which had become a habit, this moment of standing and looking before entering. The crew was already seated and talking. Someone had put a chair at the center of the table, not the far end, and nobody mentioned it, but everyone had been aware of it since the table was set. He walked to it and sat down. The meal lasted 2 hours. Gron ate from every dish. He did not eat large portions, but he ate from all of them, and he was quiet in a different way than he had been quiet in the early weeks. In the early weeks his silence had been distance. Now it was the silence of someone paying close attention. At one point, a crew member named Dav told a story about the first time he ever tried to make his mother's bread and produce something that could have been used as a building material. And the table laughed. And Gron made a sound that was not quite laughter, but was clearly a response to the humor of it. A short exhale through his mandibles that Rail recognized as something he had never heard from a Vrethian before. When the meal was winding down and the table was covered in empty dishes and the quiet, slow kind of talking that comes at the end of a long meal, Gron reached into his jacket and produced a small data token, flat and dark, marked with Vrethian symbols. He set it in front of Dira. "This is a personal document," he said. "Separate from my official report, I would like you to keep it." Dira picked it up. "What is it?" "A record," he said, "of each meal, my observations, the flavor notes, the ingredients, the context of each occasion, written in my own language." He paused. "I was not trained to write about food. The vocabulary is imprecise, but I tried to be accurate." She held the data token in her palm and looked at it for a long moment. "I'll get a translator to read it to me," she said. "There is one section," he said, "about the first night. I would ask that you read that one last." She nodded. She got up and went to the counter, where she had set a small sealed container earlier in the morning. She brought it back and placed it in front of him. Inside, visible through the clear top, were the dry ingredients for her grandmother's spiced rice, measured and ready to cook, and a small paper card tucked along the inside edge with hand-written instructions, slightly smudged where she had second-guessed the amount of cardamom and corrected it. "The instructions are simple," she said, "but read them twice before you start. The heat timing matters more than it looks." Gron reached out and took the container with both of his upper hands. His lower hands came up a moment later and held it from underneath. It was the Vrethian receiving gesture, the one used for something that was irreplaceable, and Rael, who had read enough Vrethian body language to recognize it, looked down at his plate and said nothing. The docking prep notice came an hour later. The crew walked Gron to the airlock together, not as a formal escort but as people walking alongside someone to a door. He shook hands with each of them at the airlock, not the short practice shake from his first day, but a real one with a pause in it. He shook Dira's hand last. She held it for a moment. "Safe travels, Gron," she said. "Thank you," he said, "for the imprecision." She laughed. He went through the airlock. The crew stood at the viewport and watched his shuttle undock and pull away slowly into the dark. It grew smaller, and then it was just a light among many lights, and then the turn of the station carried it out of the viewport's range. 3 weeks later, on a Vrethian diplomatic vessel traveling toward the compact's central systems, Gron stood alone in the small crew galley. He had the sealed container open on the counter, and the handwritten card propped against the wall where he could read it. He measured the spices carefully twice, the way she had written. He put the heat on low and watched the rice begin to absorb the liquid.